Thank you, worship team, really. I have not come to bring peace to the earth, but a sword. At the risk of sounding odd, New Day, I have to admit, I get a little kick out of hearing Jesus talk like this. I don't know about y'all, but when I first read this, I was like, whoa, for real? Like, that is not what I had come to understand Jesus to be. Jesus is preparing his disciples to go off and gather the people, to actually do the work of building his movement. And this is part of what he tells them. Do not think I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. Jesus is coming with real talk here. At least for me, these words seem to turn the traditional image of the sweet, gentle, always on his best behavior, harmless, frankly kind of boring Jesus, right on its head. This morning, I invite you to enter this text with me and wrestle with it. Let it weave in and out of your own story. I will share just a little bit of mine. If you've heard this before, listen with new ears and see what the text is asking of us. We're going to look at the false peace of empire, the sword as holy disruption, and taking up our cross. Since we can never understand the biblical scripture outside of the context in which it was written, let's look at that for a minute. Jesus entered the world at the height of the Roman Empire, the most extensive political and social structure in Western civilization. As the empire expanded, it gradually absorbed more and more territory in the Eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, Egypt, Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, Syria, and eventually Judea. All these territories would come under the rule of Emperor Caesar Augustus, who to the Romans was really much more than a king. He was a god. Conquered subjects were encouraged to put their faith in the emperor, who was their lord. The narrative of empire was that his conquest had preserved peace and increased wealth for the people. Before Jesus, the very word gospel referred to the good news of Caesar having established peace and security in the world. This peace of Rome, the Pax Romana as it became known, was nothing more than a paper-thin farce. In order to maintain this peace, the Romans resorted to the most brutal suppression of their enemies, squashing rebellion and maintaining order through terror, economic exploitation, and military might. In cases of outright rebellion or a challenge to the state, a special form of public execution was employed to send a strong message to anyone who might consider aligning themselves with such a movement. This is the Pax Romana, the peace of empire. As Jesus prepares to send his disciples into the world to carry his message, he gives them these words. Do not think I have come to bring peace. I have not come to bring peace. This is the context in which Jesus starts to shake things up. He begins to teach, okay, actually you've heard that Caesar is king, but no, I say God is king. With God as king, we are talking about crossing boundaries, forgiveness, healing, inclusion, breaking all the rules for the sake of relationship. A world held together by a loving, caring, relational God you can know as Abba, Daddy. Jesus starts proclaiming a new gospel, a good news of liberation. Jesus' movement is a powerful rejection of the false peace of empire's domination system. Jesus had to know how this prophetic message was going to be received by the powers of empire. You saw the picture. When he tells his disciples, follow me, what is he asking of them? What is he asking of us? If they are going to create the alternative of God's movement, Jesus and his disciples would have to disrupt the false peace of empire. Brothers and sisters, you and I are also being called to confront the false peace of empire as well. The United States, much like Rome, is a global empire that has enveloped land and resources through military and economic warfare and drawn people to it from all around the world with a seductive fantasy of wealth and prosperity. The Pax Romana is the American dream. My family would not be here if the United States hadn't pillaged the resources of the Dominican Republic and left its economy in shambles. After many years of struggling to work and taking on loan debt to put themselves through school in the DR, my parents found themselves, now college graduates, on the island, but unable to make a living enough to sustain a family. American-backed policies were such that resources were heavily consolidated among the powerful and elite on the island. Decent earning jobs were so few and far between, you had to either have a famous name or have political connections to get one. And so most people live in extreme poverty or struggle to make ends meet. My dad worked hard to earn a degree in law, and my mom in industrial engineering. Did y'all know that? And the economy of the DR was not kind to them. Papi and his two friends opened up a law practice together. And when they were lucky enough to actually get a case, instead of splitting the money 3 ways, my dad's partners would let him keep all the money so he could take care of his newborn son. Obviously not sustainable. When even that wasn't enough, my tia, who was living in the States, would ship American jeans to the island, and my dad would sell them for her and keep a small cut of the sale for the family. Ironically, those same jeans were most likely sewn by child laborers on the island for pennies a day, as many American companies set up shop in the DR to take advantage of cheap labor. We lived in a tiny house in Santiago, and Mommy sometimes jokes now that she would lie awake at night in that house, worrying mice were gonna eat me in my sleep. She wasn't laughing then. This was not the life they wanted for their kid. Enter the American dream. My parents abandoned the island and came to the United States determined to find something different. They arrived in this country to learn that their degrees meant absolutely nothing here. My mother would work long hours with other immigrant women in a factory, building cabinet drawers, in dark, unsanitary conditions where these women constantly put up with sexual harassment and violence. My dad spent days in a factory making plastic tablecloths and plexiglass for less than minimum wage and would drive a cab at night. My dad talks about feeling a deep sadness, a hollowness that he couldn't shake for years after coming to this country. All of this to make money, to pay rent, and raise me and now my sister in the ghettos of Washington Heights in the early 90s. Like millions of others, my parents saw no other choice but to abandon their home and allowed themselves to be seduced to this country by the American lie of access, of status markers of success, of a piece that was stolen from our home for the benefit of the American house of cards. When the dream was sold to them, it didn't specify that the wealth and prosperity of America was built on the backs of black and brown people. I have not come to bring peace. Brothers and sisters, the false peace of empire isn't just maintained through threat of violence and economic exploitation. It is also maintained through psychological warfare. Television, film, music, advertising. We are constantly bombarded with messages day in and day out of what it looks like to be successful, what it takes to be worthy, desirable, how much money, how attractive, how white, how masculine, how successful you have to be okay, to relax and breathe easy. Standards that we could never live up to. Try as we will to do everything right, we can never be good enough. There was a very clear and consistent narrative about young black and brown men in my communities when I was growing up. It wasn't, will you drop out, end up selling drugs on the street, or wind up locked up? It was a matter of when. For whatever reason, I was identified and selected to be one of the exceptions. Pulled out of classes as young as I can remember and put in gifted and talented programs. given opportunities that none of the other kids from my hood were given, told I was going to be successful if only I did X, Y, and Z. Selected for the Prep for Prep program in middle school, I was given a scholarship to attend an elite private middle school on the Upper East Side because I wasn't going to be successful in my community. I had to go to where success was, and it wasn't around us. I had to be like them, dress like them, talk like them. 11, 12 years old, I learned to like the music they liked, eat the foods they ate, talk about us the way they talked about us. Poor Dominican boy thrust into affluent white culture, the likes of which I had only seen on TV, where it was presented as the very meaning of success. This seems silly now, but I have this very clear memory of one day in the 7th grade when my best friend at the time decided to make fun of me in front of a group of kids, asking what was wrong with my disgusting hair anyway, that it looked like a wet poodle. Whoa. And everyone laughed. I remember learning in that moment that I could never let my hair grow long again. When the face of that success told me that the black in my body would never let me be like them, I learned to reject my body. I learned to reject blackness. I learned to reject my people. As I got older at Bronx Science High School, I met a beautiful girl who for some reason was interested in me, and we got together. I no longer had to deal with the feelings I had towards other boys in school, because this is what it looked like to be doing it right. And for 8 years I wore that mask. I learned to police my body, the way I moved, the way I spoke. No more singing, no more dancing. No one could ever suspect I was gay. I learned how to show you what you wanted to see and nothing else. I learned how to hide everything about me that didn't line up with that image of success that I'd been sold. I learned how to forget myself. I had seen how hard my parents worked so that I could be successful. They had given up everything. I was not about to make all that be for nothing. Disappointing them was not an option. In fact, with all the chaos going on in my home, maybe if I could be successful enough, I could keep my family together. I understood what was being demanded of me. I was being offered a very hard choice, and I chose success. So, money, power, prestige, wealth. Empire shows you what you have to be worth a damn. And we often don't realize the price we pay to play along. But how do we cope with the impossible contradictions that we allow into our minds and hearts? We numb, we fracture ourselves, we lie to those around us, and we lie to ourselves. We lose touch with our own desires and choice. We stay in relationships and jobs that don't fulfill us. We deny our truth and pretend to be people we are not. We create false peace and learn to be comfortable in it. In September 2010, I had a grand mal seizure on the bathroom floor at my mother's apartment, no more than 10 minutes after having stepped out of my car. I spent the next 5 days in a hospital bed with EKG and EEG monitors strapped to my head and torso under 24-hour video surveillance as doctors struggled to figure out what was causing my body to shut down. What was making it hard for them to figure that out was that I was sneaking away from the camera and hiding behind the bed frame so that I could get high. It had been over 2 years since I'd been able to fall asleep without using something, and I was afraid what would happen to me if I didn't use. We all know the destructive power of alcohol and drug addiction. We hear countless stories of the chaos addiction reaps in the lives of those who are in the grips. Relationships torn apart, deteriorated health, lost jobs, pain and degradation. We see them play out in movies and in our communities all the time. Sometimes in our very own homes. Perhaps you yourself have lived through the experience of addiction. What we often don't hear, though, when we talk about addiction is peace. Those drugs that caused my kidneys to shut down, that I needed so desperately I was willing to steal money out of my mother's bank account, that I was willing to spend decades in jail in order to cop. Believe it or not, those drugs brought me peace. A false peace for sure, but peace nonetheless. Those drugs that almost ended my life that night in September, and many other nights like it. The ones I reached for when the pain of isolation overwhelmed me. The drugs I turned to when I no longer knew how to cope with swallowing one more racist comment at school. The chemicals that silenced that constant fear of being discovered that kept me up at night. Those drugs helped me survive. My parents had done everything within their means, and then some, to give me the life they dreamt I could have. And I learned how to play that part to a T. I'd figured out how to break my own bones and mold myself into the shape I had to be successful. And the pain was excruciating. Those drugs helped me silence the reminders that this vision of success, this American dream, was never meant for me. Every single time I used, I was slowly killing myself. And I got a few minutes of peace. So this is how I lived my life, day in and day out, for longer than I care to remember. But on that night in September, through that seizure, God broke in. God offered me the most exquisite grace, a disruption, a moment's reprieve from the blindness of denial, a choice. No guarantees, no hand to hold, just a choice. Life or death. Would I be willing to let go of peace for the promise of life? I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. So what does it look like for an individual or a community to challenge false peace? In Ferguson, Missouri, protesters have taken to the streets to demand an end to racist police violence in their city for now a little over 90 days. The Ferguson PD repeatedly called for the disbursement of the protests, for an end to the unrest, for a restoration of peace. What is peace at a time when every 28 hours another black woman, man, or child has their life extinguished at the hands of law enforcement? Who does that peace serve? What is peace when the poor residents of Detroit are having their water supply shut off by privatized utility companies? What is peace when underfunded schools are more likely to prepare our babies for prison than for college? What is peace when billion-dollar corporations are putting so much toxic waste into our atmosphere that the very survival of our species is in jeopardy? I have not come to bring peace to the earth, but a sword. Brothers and sisters, what does Jesus mean when he says this? Jesus is not referring to a literal sword. In fact, I believe deeply that in Jesus we find the very embodiment of nonviolent confrontation. In the end, knowing the authorities are coming for him, he doesn't plan a violent grandstand. He is willing to go to the cross, the most horrific form of public execution the empire had in its arsenal. In the scriptures, the early Christians go on to tell stories of a resurrected Jesus, and they never once have him plotting to exact his revenge. He doesn't even bring it up. He is concerned with the future of the movement. The sword Jesus is referring to is not a literal one, but it is certainly a bold and direct confrontation. In order to free ourselves from each other from the trappings of false peace, God will show up in a holy disruption. Sometimes God shows up through a people who rise up and refuse to be silent. Sometimes God shows up through a person who for the first time truly sees us and holds us accountable. Sometimes God shows up through a crisis, disease, separation, a breakdown that shatters life as we know it. Sometimes God shows up through you. Do not think I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. The sword, brothers and sisters, is a type of death. We have allowed empire to make Jesus and Christianity into a watered-down, domesticated version of itself. The way of Jesus is not about creating nice people.
That's right.
It is not about being a part of a special club, of having a positive self-image. It is certainly not about playing the morality game where you get to do everything right and play by the rules and feel superior to some other group of your choosing. It is not about grin and bear it so you can make it to an afterlife.
That's right.
The way of Jesus is about entering the mystery of death and resurrection. The way of Jesus is about transformation, and he is inviting us to follow him. What does this ask of us? Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. I don't usually use this language, but I have experienced my recovery from addiction as a kind of death and rebirth. I look at the man I used to be only 3 years and 10 months ago, and I don't recognize myself or the life I live today. I stand before you a new person. Not perfect. Woo! Not by a long shot. But different. Sometimes I burst into tears of awe and gratitude at the man I am and the life I live today. And I'm just getting started. But before this new person could begin to emerge, I had to let go of the old me. I had to be willing to get help, to seek guidance, to do things I had never done before. I didn't know it as such then, but I felt the presence of God for the first time on the night I finally decided to get clean, December 22nd, 2010. I walked into a 12-step meeting in the basement of St. Elizabeth's Church on 187th Street and Wadsworth Avenue in the Heights. No idea what I was walking into. The weight of years of secrecy on my shoulders, shaking, ashamed, and guess what happened? I heard my story. I heard the stories of other people who had done many of the same things I'd done, who had hurt their loved ones, who had lost relationships and jobs, who had come close to losing everything, and who had recovered. Men and women who showed up that night for no other reason than to help others who were going through the same thing that they had once gone through. Men and women who told me it was going to be okay, that I had nothing to be ashamed of, that I was going to be safe, that I was safe. Men and women who told me that I never had to use again, that one day at a time I could get better, that all it would take was willingness to get honest and courage to show up for myself. In order for the new me to begin to emerge, I had to be willing to let go of what I knew and open to the possibility of something greater. All I needed was the tiniest bit of faith, the size of a mustard seed. Just enough faith to have the courage to step forward on a new path. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Don't misunderstand me, New Day. The process of transformation, when God brings that holy disruption, it is not going to be easy. Jesus calls it the sword. It's going to hurt. Jesus says we will have to take up our cross. This is another term we have watered down so far it has lost its power. When Jesus says we will have to take up our cross, this is not just putting up with a hangnail for God. This is about what you'll have to give up. This is about what you'll have to give up to be true to who you are, to who God is calling you to be. And it won't be a one-time thing either. You'll face choices every step of the way. Jesus says, you will have to do this. Yes, go out and live the alternative of the kingdom. Reject the isolation imposed on you and build community together. Let the way you live be a confrontation of empire. Disrupt the false peace.
Yes.
And when you do, don't do it out of some romanticized delusion that it will be easy. When you challenge the way of empire, you better be ready for their stones. Understand you might not survive it, but you will risk facing death in order to choose life. Brothers and sisters, we will have to give up all the seductive illusions, the false peace, the people, places, and things that would hold us back. Again and again, we will have to choose life. Big things and little things. On a personal level, just in the last couple of years, what did this look like? This looked like facing the very real possibility of losing my friends and family, but choosing to come out and be true to who I am. This looked like choosing to walk away from job security and a great salary to pursue a calling and ultimately find work that changed the path of my life forever. And I gotta give a shout out to Doug Nepper and the South Bronx AIM program in the house. Can we give him a round of applause? This looked like stepping up to the plate and taking on responsibilities I wasn't sure I could handle, and risking failure because I had a feeling that I could be that leader. This looked like being willing to be seen as lame and give so many no thank yous, not tonight, maybe some other time. This looked like recognizing when it was time for me to walk away, even as it broke my heart to do so. What are the hard choices that you are being called to make to be true to who you are, New Day? In order to access our deepest yes, we must be able to give some very strong and powerful no's. Amen. Brothers and sisters, Jesus is inviting us to step out of the game. Plain and simple. He is saying you can give up the false illusions of success. You do not have to live according to the empire. You are a divine child of God, whole and complete and sacred just as you are, in all of who you are. You do not have to earn it. Why is this so hard for us to believe? In sharing my story here this morning, I do it not because there's anything exceptional about it. Sure, it's a bit dramatic. But you know. Okay. But seriously, I am not alone in this. I am sure of that. I want people to know that. Enough of the suffering silently. The same way that God showed up for me, God shows up for you. Are you paying attention? Neil Donald Walsh puts it this way: yearning for a new way will not produce it. Yearning for a new way will not produce it. Only ending the old way can do that. You cannot hold on to the old, all the while declaring you want something new. The old will defy the new. The old will deny the new. The old will decry the new. There is only one way to bring in the new. You must make room for it. Yes. This is God's love, brothers and sisters. The Song of Songs says, a flash of love is like a flash of fire, a flame of Yahweh himself. When this flame comes upon you, you can resist it. We often do. Or you can let it burn away all that you are not and allow it to reveal your true essence. You will always be given a choice. No guarantees. No hand to hold.
Amen.
Only faith.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.